But okay, what was the role in WHO during this pandemic?
Well, WHO was headed by Dr. Tedros, who was not a medical doctor. He was a health minister out of Ethiopia, and he was plucked out of that position to take the role of Director General of the WHO 6 years ago. And on a 5-year term, he just got reelected. And he was really the handpick of Xi Jinping in China. He was the CCP's primary choice, and he was also backed by Bill Gates. And if you look at the WHO, the primary financial contributor to the WHO is the United States. And the second largest contributor is Bill Gates. So they accept their money from sovereign nations and also individuals. But when individuals give their funding to the WHO, they don't do it just in a straight philanthropic purpose. They have an objective that they're trying to achieve. And whether it's Bill Gates or anybody else, they are going to be directing the WHO to use that money in a manner that they think is best. And that's not always, in my opinion, in the best interest of the health of the world. And during COVID, Tedros, as the leader, refused to address the issue of the sourcing of the COVID-19 virus, which everybody believes is the Wuhan lab. And he encouraged shutdowns. So for our CDC, for example, would take, we need to go back and take a look at how this was created. So in 2005, the WHO created the amendments, and it was centered around getting worldwide participation if international pandemic was created, which made a lot of sense. And that's a good role to play. And their participation in that, or our participation in that as the United States, we accepted it as an advisory role. So that means that they could come and they say, this is what we think you should do, and this is what we suggest you do. And we would have the right to say, yeah, I think that's great, we'll do it. Or no, that's not the way we think it's best to be done. What's going on now in Geneva is they want to change the terminology of the original 2005 amendment agreement from advisory to governance. Big change. In the United States, that would be a treaty that would have significant binding effects on our requirement to abide by, which would need to have approval of the United States Senate, according to our Constitution. The Constitution says that the United States Senate has to advise and consent to the president on international treaties that affect the population of the United States. Well, the 2005 was a presidential agreement. It was by President Bush. And it did not have binding impact on the United States. It was advisory, as I said earlier. So what President Biden is trying to do now is he's put out a statement already saying that he was not going to be bringing this to the United States Senate for review. He simply was going to just say it's just an update to the amendments that have already been agreed to by a presidential agreement. But the terms of that agreement are radically different and require the review of the Senate, which is why I involved the AGs in the letter that we had talked about previously. So getting back to your original question, now that that premise is set, the WHO, during the COVID period of time, did a terrible job in managing the COVID-19. They supported minimizing the availability of options to treat COVID. And we know now, for as hard as they tried, ivermectin was a very effective tool. And I can tell you personally, I had COVID twice and I did not get the COVID-19 shot. And I used ivermectin when I contracted COVID. And in 5 days, I was pretty much out of the clear. 3 to 5, third day, I was feeling great. 5 days later, I was back to normal for the most part. You know, the hydroxychloroquine, the way they knocked these repurposed drugs, they couldn't support it because the only way the COVID-19 vaccine through the pharmaceutical companies was justified was as an emergency use vaccine. And you can't have an emergency use status if there is an alternate product that could be proved to be successful. And ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine had that capability. Unfortunately, they were demonized to maintain the status of emergency use, which was a financial decision. So we're getting back to the money question. And it was mandated that folks take it. And a lot of people lost their jobs, and a lot of people got injured by it. It was really made for the folks that were in the latter ages, 65 and above, and who had comorbidities, like blood pressure, heart ailments, just comorbidities, things that would make them more likely to suffer a health injury. They were more vulnerable. But when they went right down the list, and even to children whose participation in getting ill with COVID was virtually nil, made absolutely no sense. So it was driven by primarily money. And there's a secondary issue that perhaps we'll talk about in a minute. But